What they called a decapitation strike, an attempt to kill Saddam. Today, the head of his statue was knocked off. The people he suppressed for so long, dragging it around the heart of Baghdad. But the questions of where the dictator is and whether he is dead or alive remain unanswered. Neil Connery, ITV News, in liberated Baghdad.
All the images were coming from, of course, Firdos Square and Baghdad University. And between these two areas right here, interesting that this was the site of the statue coming down and a lot of peaceful kind of demonstrations, etc., while this site right here was the site of so much violence and continued firefights. Coalition forces are still in control of Rashid Air Base and, of course, the international airport here. And other two things of note, there was two people from an F-15 that had ejected out of their aircraft after it was shot down that have still not been found in the area, and two special operations forces to the south of Baghdad were recovered. If we go to the big map, we can take a look at some of the interesting things occurring. Of course, coalition forces are still in control of H1 and H2 out here, and up in this area right here at the Harir airfield, there was a significant delivery of M1A1 tanks, of armored fighting vehicles, and some other equipment for the 173rd Airborne, who hasn't seen action for 30 years. Although they did take their first step towards action when they and their counterparts from the Iraqi forces engaged with heavy barrage Iraqi forces in the area. Moving southward down in Basra, the UK troops continue to state that they're under control as far as the looting, and some of that has been taken into account in their statements. But U.S. Secretary Rumsfeld bristled a little bit today when asked about the sluggish appearing humanitarian aid influx into the area. He stated that the railhead was now under the control and would be opened up within 7 days, that significant food supplies were there in the region and would be distributed, and that British engineers had turned the electricity back on. All the time, Mr. Shalabi, of course, up north in Nasiriyah, was beckoning for and asking for General Garner and asking why aid was not there yet. Manita?
When they retreated. So the Royal Engineers have made another one by driving their amphibious vehicles into the water.
Even though the situation around Basra itself is now stabilizing, there may well be other areas around here where Saddam's grip is still strong. That's why these guns are now heading back into the desert to help secure the area to the north and west of the city itself.
This is where the artillery battery is heading to replace these gunners who've already been here for more than a week. It's 47 degrees Celsius and the wind isn't cooling. It's hot like the blast of air out of an oven door. Out here, developments in Basra mean very little.
Yeah, we've been told about Basra being taken and everything, and it kind of feels like, as a whole, that the army is getting closer to the end. But for us sitting around here, we're not seeing much action, so it doesn't feel any different to us at the minute.
It's frustrating because we haven't seen much of the enemy, but you just got to keep plodding along, haven't you? Get on with the job.
That means heading even further north into this wilderness, and the battery captain's orders are to remain ready to fight.
They say Basra's fallen. It hasn't fallen yet, I don't think. There are still pockets of resistance out there. That is why we're still ready to carry on doing our job just south of the Euphrates River at present.
So you can look down to Basra and also fire north over the Euphrates?
Yes, from the position we're at the moment, yes, we can fire down towards Basra and north to the Euphrates River.
There were no fewer than 4 Iraqi army divisions up there. And although the latest reports suggest many soldiers have deserted, these guns may still be called upon to fire again. Catherine Jones, Southern Iraq.
House with their guns blazing. They went from room to room in search of Iraqi fighters, with nothing more than a portrait of Saddam Hussein hanging impotently on the wall to stop them. Instead of armed resistance, the Raqqasans had to fight their way through streets of cheering crowds. And public displays of affection.
What is amazing to see is exactly how quickly the resistance to U.S. forces in Halab melted away. Just yesterday, the Raqqasans were engaged in a major firefight here.
Today, the Screaming Eagles began a war for hearts and minds, giving fuel to a water treatment plant and a power station of sorts. Still, many Iraqis said it will take time for the Americans to win their trust. One man telling the two-star,
"We don't want to be at the last point, at the critical point to make friendship with him or reconcile with him or anything like that. But any honest Iraqi person wish to see a good man controlling Iraq, not to substitute one by another bad one."
For now, there is a vacuum here, and Hala, home to the old Babylon, and this palace, which many here say Saddam was building for himself as part of his campaign to build a new Babylon, are under American control. The only question now is what to do next. Brian Chilcote, CNN, with the 101st Airborne in Hala.
Marines. After weeks of greeting all Iraqis as potential snipers, they've been mixing with the locals in the centre of Baghdad. Time for some shopping as well as breakfast in a local cafe and reunions after days on the move. But they'd be well advised to keep their guard, with heavy fighting on the outskirts of the city and reports that a Marine has been killed. Despite the triumphal entry of its columns into Baghdad, the United States has been keen to stress that the fight isn't over. Though heavy armours secured much of the capital, B-52 bombers overflew it last night. Tank and gunfire was heard from the western Mansour district. The American Defense Secretary warned his troops the war isn't over.
There's a lot more fighting that's going to be done. More people are going to be killed. Let there be no doubt. This is not over, despite all the celebrations on the street. They're going to go in at exactly the right moment and do a very good job.
As if to underline the fact, the Marines who toppled Saddam yesterday were fighting a heavy gun battle today. Within hours of this jubilant moment, the same troops were pounding another part of Baghdad. The heavy armour that secured Saddam's city, the Shiite ghetto, mopped up pockets of resistance overnight. Heavy artillery, mortars and machine gun fire were reported in the northeast of Baghdad. Jets have continued to take off from the aircraft carrier USS Constellation in the Persian Gulf. Their target likely to be Republican Guard positions north of Baghdad. Saddam's hometown of Tikrit may be his last bastion.
Huge, widespread looting and rioting and instability, they may have to think again. But at the moment, I think they would probably argue that the situation is more or less under control.
Paul, what about the north of the country? We were talking about Kirkuk there, but what about Tikrit as well? Are we going to see more movement in that direction?
We certainly will, Maxine, and I think what we will see is a fairly deliberate move by the Americans.
Access to these checkpoints. The Marines are all around the city, as well as the U.S. Army, and the Iraqis are making good on their threat to carry out suicide bomb attacks. Now, again, just a short while ago, in the distance, I can see the smoke rising about 400 meters from where I am, quarter of a mile away. An Iraqi civilian walked up to a Marine post, just guards on the street, and then detonated, obviously killing himself in a huge blast. It was very loud, black smoke still pouring up. Oh, maybe 5-10 minutes later, a suicide bomber injuring very badly 4 Marines. Leon?
Another day, another city, toppling the image of Saddam Hussein. Kirkuk and its massive oil fields tonight in the hands of Americans. Kurds have long dreamed of this city as a capital for a Kurdish state, and this is where it starts to get complicated. They have risked and lost lives freeing it from Saddam, but America has already promised a fearful neighboring Turkey that won't happen. So are they dancing in the street of a city they'll soon be asked to hand over? This afternoon they learned how Saddam's troops had had their radios confiscated so they wouldn't hear of defeat in Baghdad. Now, just like Basra and Baghdad, the looting has started. Breaking down the past is the easy bit. But what of the future? The armed Kurds want some sort of self-rule, while down in the south, a different faction. They've already started political rallies. Can they all be happy with the new order to come? After decades of repression, so many dreams awaiting fulfillment. Tonight, news of the first political assassination. In Najaf, a Shiite leader was stabbed to death in a mosque. His leader had called on Iraqis not to hinder the US and British invasion.
For the first time for days, we were able to cross one of the bridges over the River Tigris. The city still echoes to the sound of gunfire. The US troops are on full alert. We approach slowly on foot. This, the Jamaria Bridge, is where some of the heaviest battles took place. We were allowed to pass, but were told to drive carefully, avoiding an unexploded rocket-propelled grenade. We headed on into a place which until a few days ago had been a closed zone. Some of the fiercest fighting took place in an area which few Iraqis have ever been allowed to visit. This was the regime's inner sanctum. We're now inside Saddam Hussein's sprawling palace compound. There has been a huge battle here. US Army troops are currently going through the building. One building in the compound is huge. 4 statues of Saddam Hussein are on top of his biggest residence. It's about 3 times the size of Buckingham Palace. We were allowed inside.
First we're going to go through here and we're going to start the basement. We'll go to the middle floor.
It was a remarkable guided tour. A US Army captain showed us around for more than 2.5 hours. We saw giant reception rooms where Saddam would have met foreign dignitaries, as well as the places where the Revolutionary Command Council held its meetings. We were also taken to Saddam's personal quarters, the kitchen where his food was prepared. It would then have been tested by his personal food taster. Saddam is known to be paranoid about being poisoned. And the bathrooms with their gold-plated taps. This palace is huge. It's also almost completely empty. It has been thoroughly searched by the military, but they still insist that we have to have an escort around the building. We were told there may be secret passages that haven't yet been found and that we should remain alert at all times. The building has its own private cinema. An obscure Bulgarian documentary was the only film left behind. There was a strong room built to bank vault specifications and a gun room for Saddam's collection of firearms. They, like nearly everything else here, have been removed. The Iraqis obviously decided to clear the building before the war started. We're now in the pool area. You've been here for a couple of days now. What are your impressions of this place?
I believe that this is a marvelous palace just because of the architecture and the silver pieces we did find, which of course you can't see now because they're locked up. And I think that he possibly liked to keep his loyalists very close to him. That's why he kept them here and keep them happy.
We were told the palace with its large grounds wasn't bombed during the war because it will soon have a new use. The army will move out and this will be the base for the new interim administration in Iraq. James Bayes, Baghdad, 5 News.
In the words of a Pentagon official, Saddam Hussein has gone away underground, either literally or figuratively. It's been easy enough to pull down the imagery of his regime, but the real man behind the icons appears to have slipped out of reach. There is no sign of the regime having a command and control in Baghdad anymore. The daily press briefings by the defiant information minister have stopped abruptly. The only visible minister now is the Iraqi ambassador to the UN in New York. This is what he had to say.
No, I cannot receive questions. I told you, I repeat it again, the game is over. I hope the peace will prevail and the Iraqi people at the end of the day will have a peaceful life.
What do you mean that the game is over, sir?
The war, I mean.
So you're convinced the war is over?
Yeah.
What is the situation with Saddam Hussein?
Well, I don't know. This is perhaps the American knows. I have no relationship with Saddam, so I can't tell you.
What American intelligence analysts know about Saddam's whereabouts has been gleaned from intercepting electronic communications or chatter and from something they call human intelligence or a spy working within the regime. This was apparently what led to the missile attack on a house in a Baghdad suburb, a tip-off that Saddam had been there, but no one knows if it was a successful hit.
He tries to hide himself in poor populated areas, not in bunkers. It's safer for him to move in normal houses, disguised.
One theory is that he's already fled to his birthplace of Tikrit. Those who've served in his government say he always chose to stay apart from his sons, Qusay and Uday.
They rule like the mafia rule, the Godfather rule. They have to be separated from, so if one of them is dead, the others survive.
With his lookalikes and bizarre security arrangements, in power Saddam kept everyone guessing. And unless his body is found and confirmed with DNA tests, the mystery of his whereabouts will continue. Charlotte Hume, 5 News.
Welcome to Basra University, one of Iraq's top centres of learning. 3 weeks ago, there were 18,000 students studying here, and then the war began. The future Iraq will need managers, engineers, technicians, all the kind of people that could be trained somewhere like this. But just look at the place. No wonder the staff are only coming to salvage their belongings if they can, and the students are nowhere to be seen. Today, the Dean of the College of Sciences has come to see just how bad the damage is. It all happened, he says, in a 2-day frenzy of looting after Saddam's security forces lost control over Basra.
We need security in the city, better than food, better than water. Really, this is what we need. I would like to see the people, the student here. This is enjoy for me and enjoy for.
And important for Iraq.
Yes, and important for Iraq. Yes, for a new Iraq, really.
Temporarily, at least, the university does have some protection while it serves as the base for the British artillery. But even with half a regiment in here, the looters still try their luck. While others sneak in through the back.
We do the best we can. We get them out of the area. We take them to the outskirts, but you turn your back and straight back in.
Sergeant Hume decides to clear them off the campus quickly, still carrying what they've stolen. But at the exit, there's another patrol, with a major who isn't feeling quite so lenient.
No, nothing.
Good. Okay.
Get away, guys. Go on. It's a very nice rabbit. You can have the rabbit.
With us, they're very good-natured. It's that they're not difficult because we're armed and and we're organised, and so they're not for the most of the time a threat to us. But for the people who are charged with looking after this university, the janitors who live in little houses around here, they come and they do threaten violence. It's give me a fridge or I'll kill you tomorrow. They are a poor people. But they're not poorly, they're not starving, and it doesn't give them the right to take things away. This university, with its agricultural college and its engineering school, is the future of this country. We need to help to rebuild it.
But with so much stolen already and far too few British soldiers to patrol every place that needs protection, it would seem the rebuilding of Basra University and of the city itself may well have to wait. Catherine Jones, Basra, 5 News.
2 young Iraqis walk off the street to make a withdrawal from the central bank. They haven't come well prepared for the job, and they don't stand much chance against the steel doors. They've come a bit late in the day. They've been beaten to much of the loot already. Iraq's state coffers were managed from here. Now it's been utterly trashed. The leaders who benefited from Iraq's wealth haven't been spared either. This is what's happened to the house of Iraq's former Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz today. The man who for years represented Saddam Hussein to the outside world being looted by ordinary Iraqis, and no one was there to stop them. For coalition forces, the looters aren't a military threat. These American Marines are much more interested in hunting for weapons. They're not getting involved in stopping the looting.
Do not have the manpower to facilitate stopping all this looting. It's just not, we just can't do it.
And so people are making off with everything that hasn't been nailed down, and some things that were. We made our way to the house of one of Saddam Hussein's closest relatives, just as people were making off with his goods. By the time we got there, hardly anything was left. Ordinary Iraqis are having a free hand at helping themselves to what they want. The only bright side is that they don't seem to be targeting private homes and shops, just government buildings and the homes of top officials.
This is what remains of the mansion of one Watban Ibrahimi, cousin of Saddam Hussein, one of the most powerful men in this country for decades. And now look at it.
One day hailed as heroes, the next day under attack. American Marines were drawn into their toughest battle of the war so far as they sought to enter Baghdad city from the east.
This is an intense firefight. The Marines have come under fire from rocket-propelled grenades and machine guns. They're now trying to get through to a mosque where it's fought. Saddam Hussein himself is holed up.
No ordinary mosque, as it turned out, this one flanked by Saddam's militiamen. The fighting lasted more than an hour, but when it finished, there was no sign of Saddam Hussein.
Amassing on the border, poised to move into Iraq, that would suddenly widen the war, and the coalition is desperate to avoid that. Well, tonight the Kurds who took over Kirkuk say they'll pull out because of Turkey's reaction. The coalition must be relieved. Getting rid of Saddam is one thing, managing the aftermath, quite another.
The sight is bizarre, but this man is paddling on a fridge door belonging to Saddam Hussein. It comes from his luxury yacht, floating in Basra harbor. Coalition jets bombed it a dozen times. Inside, a state-of-the-art operating theater that will never be used again. Symbols of Saddam Hussein's demise here. But despite liberation by British forces, the people of Basra face enormous problems. We are led to a depressing place. On these mud banks, Iraqis scavenge water. This is salt water from a pipe running to a desalination plant. In Iraq, petrol is cheaper than water. It's a precious commodity in this arid land and one of the biggest humanitarian problems facing the 1.5 million people of Basra. We have no water, this man tells me. We're drinking from the drains.